the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
And get over that mountaintop, and what that's been like. I mean, it's just it's hard, and that was a tough environment to go in and get a win. And I don't know. I just think there was a lot of overreactions to how that game went last night and post game for the Vols.
I mean, I think it's obviously it's gonna probably be an overreaction because that's how fans are gonna fan. But I mean, are we getting into this Georgia game now? Are we teasing it? Or are we just jumping right in?
Let's just jump into it, because then we'll talk about how we did on the pick'em. But let's just jump into it, Matt Green.
So I think as a Tennessee fan, it is that final boss. So I think you've beaten Alabama, but you've beaten Alabama when they're no longer the gold standard. So now, maybe this Georgia team isn't even the gold standard. This is a 2-loss team. And like you were kind of saying, if not now, when? Because it felt like this was as beatable as Georgia's been in the 4 years the Heupel's been there. And you saw more of the same. Like, I don't know if you saw the stats about Heupel versus Georgia and Heupel versus everyone else. But this team's averaging in 4 years under Josh Heupel, they're averaging 40 points a game against everyone else other than Georgia. And against Georgia, they're averaging just over 14 a game. And it's like, that's just such a massive difference. It's like Georgia's kind of Heupel's kryptonite at this point.
And I just am like, when you've been wandering the wilderness that long, you take it. You're just like, all right, the best program in the sport over the last 5 years is the one that you just can't seem to get the offense going against.
Well, let's not act like that's the only team Tennessee's losing to every year, though.
I mean, if you take care of business here down the stretch, you've won 10 games in 2 of the last 3 years. You haven't lost a home game outside of the Georgia loss last year since the start of 2022 season. The first year was obviously year one. You just always toss that out. I mean, he was okay. He was right there down the stretch with Ole Miss at home. He's playing into the fourth quarter against Alabama on the road. The offense was pretty good, but like you said, you lose 30-plus guys in the portal coming in. It was a tough situation in year one, and he still won 7 regular season games. Should have beaten Purdue in the bowl game. They were robbed the goal line in that one. But, I mean, I think, by and large, he's still, and I read about this too today, is like, I still think this year has been the best coaching job thus far for Heupel, because he's had to adjust. Like, this is, Tennessee... And I mean, you saw this in person, because, I mean, you get to see how different this was. Did this look like any Josh Heupel Tennessee team in the last 3 years? Like, there was nothing about this game that reminded you of what made Tennessee's offense electric and terrifying. And this had nothing of the feel.
I mean, this seemed exactly like every other Georgia-Tennessee game, though. I mean, there was nothing.
No, because 2 years ago when you go in there, Hendon Hooker was sacked 7 times. Jalen Carter and Georgia's defensive line wreaked havoc on Tennessee's offensive line. Tennessee's offensive line struggled in this one, but Nico, he only, I think he had 3 sacks, so less than half of what Hendon Hooker faced 2 years ago in Athens. I think the difference, though, to me, and what stood out and like what I read about is, like, in Tennessee's 2 losses this season, there's a common thread, and this is something that, just diving into all the numbers this afternoon, it's like Tennessee's offense is just like, it just can't work when there's a complete dearth in explosive plays. Tennessee had 0 passing plays of 20-plus yards last night. Against Arkansas, they had 1 play through the air that went over 20 yards, and it was a 42-yarder to Dante Thornton. 0 in this game. You can't beat Georgia without the explosive plays. You can't beat Georgia without the chunk plays. Ole Miss, and this is what I talked about on stage, Matt, was like my biggest concern and why I thought it was so important that Dante Thornton played in this game, because everyone was tied to Nico playing all week. I wanted to see how many snaps Dante could play, because Dante's been your only reliable deep threat all season long. And you saw that last night where Dante had a crucial drop for Tennessee in that ball game. And Dante, without a 50-yarder, that's a touchdown difference. And I just didn't think Tennessee could beat Georgia without connecting on a couple explosive touchdowns. And they haven't been able to do that in the series yet. And I didn't think it was going to be any different here. But I just saw this Georgia secondary with Malachi Starks and the guys they had back there. They were gettable. This was not the Keely Ringos of the world in this secondary that was going to be matching up against these Tennessee receivers. And Tennessee's receivers just did not rise to the challenge, unfortunately. Again, And that was the difference in the game, because Tennessee still ran all over Georgia. Like Peyton Lewis and Dylan Sampson both ran for over 5 yards to carry. Dylan Sampson had the biggest play of the night for Tennessee's offense, a 27-yard touchdown run to put them up 17-14 in the second quarter. But that was it. Like Tennessee, everyone so looks at the running game and this, that, and the other, but it's like Tennessee cannot get to where they want to be if the vertical passing game, this offense just cannot get over the Georgia hump, especially, and get over the road hump when you're asking the defense that hasn't given up 20 plus points in almost a full calendar year to keep bailing you out. And this is a game the defense did not bail Tennessee out, and the offense had to connect on explosive plays. Georgia had like 6 guys whose longest reception was over 20 yards in this game. Carson Beck had all day to throw. Carson Beck threw the ball 40 times. He wasn't hit. He had 0 sacks. There were only a couple pressures in this game. James Pierce, no sacks. Joshua Josephs, no sacks. Omar Norman Lott, no sacks. Like the way, and this was something you heard me on the panel on Friday night, and I'm like, the difference between Ole Miss and Tennessee is Ole Miss gets home. Like Ole Miss's sack numbers speak for themselves. Tennessee just wears teams down. Like their sack numbers are okay in the conference, but they're not elite sack numbers. Tennessee did not get, like, to not be able to get home at all and to not blitz as much as I thought they might, just because of what they saw on tape last week, ended up being huge because Carson Beck got in a rhythm. Carson Beck got comfortable, and Tennessee's linebackers, the absence of Keenan Peely loomed large in this game too, where the young Tennessee linebackers were just exposed in coverage over and over again. They're all young, sophomores or freshmen, and it was tough because Oscar Delp out of nowhere, he has a huge game in the first half. Urasek makes big catches. It was just rough for a lot of reasons, and I did not anticipate Tennessee's defensive line. I didn't think they would have the same success that Ole Miss did, but I did think, because of what you've seen from Carson Beck and how much he struggled under duress, that would be something that, look, we just have to live with the consequences if we don't get home by sending 5 or 6. But Tennessee was sending 4. They were not sending the house at Carson Beck, and Carson Beck just sat in the pocket and just chunk played Tennessee's defense to death. They couldn't get off the field. Like 2 touchdown drives for Georgia in the second half. How long did they do a combined? Was it 15 minutes almost?
Well, they only
those
got
2
the
touchdown
ball
drives?
3 times in the second half.
Yeah.
And 2 of them were these long touchdown drives. Yeah, Georgia had 3 touchdown drives of 80-plus yards in this game. Like,
and how much time?
I'm sure that last one, I want to say they had like 8.5 minutes left when they got the ball, and scored with about 2 minutes left, I think. So,
and no turnovers. Like, you can't, there's just so many things that if you want to win on the road against the toughest place to win on the road in college football over the last 5 years, just a lot of stuff went wrong. And the frustrating part, if you're a Tennessee fan, is a lot went right for you in the first half. Like, a lot was cooking. Like, you go up 10-0. You have this defense that Tennessee has. Carson Beck you think that Carson's going to start pressing. He's in a hole again. This could get ugly for Georgia in a hurry if they're not careful. Because Georgia didn't run the ball. Like, Georgia, Nate Frazier and Chauncey Bowens had 24 carries for a combined 70 yards.
Georgia ran the ball the way they needed to keep
Carson Beck ran the ball a little bit. I mean, he had the touchdown run, but like Nate Frazier and Chauncey Bowens did not run the ball well. They both ran for less than 4 yards a carry. Chauncey Bowens had
106 yards on 31 carries.
No. That's Carson Beck. You got it. Nate Frazier and
Carson Beck's part of the running game, which is funny. That's actually, I have a stat for you, sir. 35 for 182 and 8 rushing touchdowns. Do you know what that is? Over this 8-game winning streak that Georgia has, that's the quarterback running statistics right there. 8 rushing touchdowns in the last 8 matchups in this by quarterbacks in these matchups against Tennessee. The quarterback has been a part of it every single time. And Carson Beck, especially last year, I remember you talking about that was the difference between him and Stetson Bennett.
Yeah.
And he ran for multiple first downs in that game. And Stetson did it every year, scored a rushing touchdown. Maybe 2. He may have had at least 3 in his 3 years against Tennessee. And then Justin Fields was in there too. He had a couple back in 2018. And Jake Fromm had 2 back in 2017. But I thought this game was the Mike Bobo game, honestly. Like, I was being passive aggressive in the crowd. I'll be honest. I was in the crowd for this one. every time Bobo had a great call, I'd be like, great call, Bobo. Because no, everyone loves to kill Bobo when things aren't working. Oh, in the screen game. Oh, we threw another screen. It's like, yeah, that who knows, that screen to Dom Lovett on the second possession of the game might work if he catches the ball. Like if you're dropping passes, yeah, nothing's going to work offensively if your offensive line's getting blown up and you're dropping passes. Like first play of the game, we come out and go deep to Arian Smith and should be a 45-yard reception. Like, and that just shows what Mike Bobo was thinking, how aggressively they're going to be offensively. Like, who knows how that first drive is different if Georgia's got first down at the Tennessee 35-yard line on the second play of the game. So I think the way Carson Beck played, the way the game Mike Bobo called, just some of these play actions, getting these tight ends involved, like they were just, Mike Bobo was in his bag on Saturday night, and I hope that he gets all the love he deserves for what he did. But also, this was the Carson Beck we expected to see all season long, and this was probably the best game we've seen Carson Beck play all season. That's why I hadn't really given up on Beck, because there were so many things happening, and there were even drops in this game. Like, you have to shout out the offensive line, because Georgia shook up the offensive line in this one. Ernest Green versus James Pierce was one of my, the things I was worried about the most in this game. And clearly the Georgia coaches thought the same thing, because Ernest Green did not play a snap. Georgia played the same five guys the entire game. Monroe Freeling moved over to the left tackle, and Tennessee essentially got no pressure on Beck. And when they did, Beck, he kept some plays alive with his legs. He didn't just take off. He had some of these, move out of the pocket and find a guy downfield scrambling. Like, it was very encouraging. And it's one of the reasons why, I think if Nico was not a 5-star, I don't think anyone would talk about him the way we've talked about him all season. Like, this guy's 12th in the SEC in passing touchdowns, and that's not even going into SEC only stats. Like, that's including all the stats. It's probably last in just SEC play, because we know they scored 5 touchdowns. Oh, he may not have any throwing touchdowns or passing touchdowns in that Kent State when they were up 65-0. I'm not sure if he did or
Were
not.
you asking? He had.
I'm sure he had a couple, right?
Yeah, he had several.
Okay. So yeah, it's that was one of my biggest keys to this game. Was, for one, all of these tough games Georgia's had have not been at home, and this was just a rowdy night game environment. Like, Georgia fans have complained for not getting enough night games at home. Lane Kiffin complained about it last week, but you can see why they want those games at home, because this atmosphere was just insane, honestly. And especially because Tennessee continued to take Georgia's crowd out of it, and they just got right back in it. Like, it was tough, because what was Tennessee? 10 of 18 on third down or something? Like, every time that building just got loud and was ready to erupt, Tennessee picked up another third down. But it was kind of like, I'm not going to really compare this to the Ole Miss Georgia game last week, because obviously Ole Miss just dominated Georgia. But it was similar to that, just kind of offensively, how Georgia just had to get every 10 yards. It took Tennessee 3 plays to get every 10 yards, and it was just a battle for them to get just down the field. And to their credit, they were getting in 3rd and 3 and 3rd and 4, third and manageable, and they were picking it up. But there was no 3 and outs the whole game. It was 5, 6, 7 play drives that would end in punts. So it's a very interesting game. Because I feel like if I'm a Tennessee fan, I would be frustrated, because I feel like we played well, right? If you're Tennessee, we ran for 150 yards. Dylan Sampson had a good game. Nico was efficient. He didn't really miss a lot of guys.
You pinned Georgia up multiple times. The kicking game, Jackson Ross kept pitting Georgia inside terrible situations for them. And they, that 92-yard drive where they pin you back, you don't turn the ball over. Like you said, Nico hasn't thrown an interception since the Florida game. Or the first half of the Alabama game. And that's, he had the fumble late. I don't really count that. The game was over. It was just one of those that last
you don't
little.
Count that. What do you mean
the game was over. I don't count it. I don't like it. But the other thing, we talked about it, Lance Hurd was the lowest graded Tennessee offensive player in this game at left tackle. So the tackles for Tennessee did not have a good night. And the difference in the two sides here, Carson Beck was just sitting in a clean pocket, just dicing Tennessee up. Nico's Heupel called him a warrior in the postgame. And Nico's a warrior, man. Like 12 carries, dealing with what he did. Like he wasn't sliding. Nico was taking shots and keeping drives alive. He had a couple big runs to keep drives alive on third down. Like I was very impressed. Like you talk about like where Nico would be if he wasn't labeled as a 5-star, but like again, Nico's a redshirt freshman, and you look at who the top of the conference is right now. Jalen Milroe, older. You look at Jackson Dart, older. Carson Beck, older. A lot of the
I'm
guys.
just saying in terms of like
Quinn Ewers, older.
We look at what Penn State is, and no one's like, once Drew Allard starts slinging that thing and throwing it downfield, this Penn State offense is really going to be unstoppable. It's like, well, they're not going to do that because Penn State doesn't do that, and I think that's what Tennessee. It's like they're not going to be that team. They haven't been that team all year.
The most frustrating thing to me about, the second half, because you get shut out in the second half again, and that's the other problem here is just you can't like the second half has just been a really really tough for Tennessee in the 4 years here with Heupel, and I pulled it up. Where is the stat that I found? Tennessee has been outscored by a total of 34 points in the second half. They've been shut out in the second half in back-to-back games now against Georgia. It was a different feel, obviously, than last year in Knoxville, and I still will maintain I think this was the best Tennessee played against Georgia, and I think they're getting closer, and you could tell on the dude side of things, like Tennessee's closer. They haven't completely caught Georgia in terms of personnel, but you look at that game, and they were closer. Like Ricky Gibson was really good at corner for Tennessee. You can see guys that like Georgia wanted that play now for Tennessee and are really good players. Like Dylan Sampson's a really good back. The tight ends, Miles Kitselman and Holden States had good nights. And I think Nico, that was the other thing I was going to pull up, was what Nico was doing at the clean pocket versus when he was pressured. And in a clean pocket last night, he was 18 of 25 for 150 yards. I pulled up on PFF. The thing that's crazy, though, and you talk about the stuff, he had one pass through the air that was 20 plus yards and was incomplete. Like, they weren't even trying anything down the field. I don't know if it was just because they were worried about protection because the tackles were really struggling in this game, or guys just weren't getting open, so Nico had no one to throw to. So it's really hard to decipher, like, how much of this is on Nico right now in terms of the lack of downfield explosion, because I, right now, think it's less Nico and more the receivers. I think there is the gaping issue right now with this Tennessee offense is the receiver play is just not good enough. You don't have the Jalen Hyatts, you don't have the Cedric Tillmans, the guys that scare you down the field to get open. Like Brew McCoy, I love the guy, but he's just not that difference maker down the field. Squirrel has an extremely small catch radius. I mean, Malachi Starks was early on that call where he broke up. Like Malachi Starks was tackling Squirrel on the sideline before the ball gets to him. But again, that was always going to be a hard catch. Like Squirrel doesn't have, like that was going to be hard for Squirrel to pull off even if Malachi Starks wasn't 30 seconds early. But you look at, I have to have some fun here, Matt. And you just look at where this receiving core is right now. And when Dante Thornton does not have his play or two where he breaks through and just uses speed and length and break things open a little bit, it's just glaring that Tennessee just not have guys that scare you. We talk about Georgia's lack of playmakers, and that was evident last night for them because, I mean, Dylan Bell goes out. And it wasn't like Arian Smith had a rough game for Georgia. It wasn't like Georgia had a bunch of playmakers, but they had time in the pocket, which is huge. You talk about the going from Ernest Green to, who was it? Who went in for him?
Monroe Freeling.
Yeah, like he had a great game. So that was a huge, huge swing for Georgia, and they deserve a lot of credit for making that call. And another one before you move on was Julian Humphrey got that pass interference on that first drive. Was it the very first drive Tennessee had the ball? And I don't think he played again. And so Daniel Harris came in at the other corner spot, and he pretty much locked. They pretty much locked down the Tennessee's passing game. Like I'm not the X's and O's guy, but Georgia was playing basically three safeties this whole game, and there's times where one of them wasn't even at star. They were just all three kind of at the top of the formation, like with KJ Bolden, Dan Jackson, and Malachi Starks. So I think Georgia clearly made the decision of like keeping everything in front of them because they weren't really worried about one of those guys getting something and breaking it after the catch. And early in the game it was a little frustrating because you're like, they're just picking up 3rd and 8, just pitch and catch. Like, what are we doing? Why are we playing so far off? But Kirby Smart knows more than I do about playing defense, and Glenn Schumann, of course. But also another thing about this defense, Smile Munden, this was the first game he's been back, like, full go. And I mean, this guy's a 3-year starter,
senior, preseason all conference type guy, and Georgia's best blitzing linebacker. And you saw him make a huge impact. Like that dude is a physical freak at inside linebacker. He's a better athlete. He's closer to that like Quay Walker level athlete than any of this other. No one's losing any sleep or crying for Georgia at all when a linebacker is down. They know they have five other 5-stars on the roster, but Smile Munden looks like still the best inside linebacker on this team.
And look, we have to talk about it because two things are true. Tennessee did not lose this game because of officiating, but this was a poor officiating effort here. I don't know what it was like for you in the building. I made a joke about the Malachi Starks thing, but that's one of those, like, I just don't think it's defensible. Like he's early. Like if you watch the replay, you could just like that. But I also just don't think Squirrel was going to make that play anyway. But he was early. Some stuff like you see in the moment, and you're like, okay, I don't know. This stuff, like I'm curious because I'm a big believer. We talked about on this program where, like when you watch something happen, what is your gut instinct, or what does the player do? Where does Dylan Bell when he fumbles the ball on that pitch play, which it should not be count as a pass, like that little forward motion sweep. I don't know why we're calling that a pass. Like that's just such a cop out.
That's just football. Like that's
no, I understand, but that shouldn't be a pass. We should change that rule because it's not a pass.
We should count it as rushing stats. Like that's what it is.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like that's a rush
by rule of forward lateral. So I mean that's I think why teams run the jet sweep that way so that it is a fumble because. I mean, shoot, that was the game the play that changed the SEC championship game last year. The reverse to Dylan Bell, but it was backwards and he dropped it and it was a fumble that changed the game. But I mean, what were the officiating calls that changed this game though? Like I didn't say change.
Like I think there were some the Delp one. I don't understand why they didn't look at. Because I don't know, in the moment, Delp catches, takes 2 steps, and then fumbles. And I just don't know what a catch is really anymore. No one really knows what a catch is.
See, I thought on the replay on that one, he's tucking it away, and it's like not even tucked by the time the guys hit him and force the fumble or whatever. I thought that was an incomplete pass. Like, yeah, I mean, I don't like the way that call is officiated, but I feel like that is how that call is always officiated, in my opinion.
And it's not like Georgia did anything after that, right? Like that didn't end up mattering anyway. After that play, the Jackson Dart or the Oscar Delp non-fumble.
Was that the one? Is that the one drive that ended in a punt? Like
yes, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Okay, because it was like the last 5 drives of the game. I want to say for Georgia, and it was so few possessions, I should say, in this game because Tennessee kept converting on third down, and Georgia was what I think like 8 of 14. Georgia obviously was converting a lot on third down in their own right, but yeah, just a lot of possessions or very few possessions in this game and a lot of third down conversions.
Well, it's also just bad luck. Like on that drive we're talking about where Dylan Bell, like I don't like that rule and Tennessee jumps on that fumble and then they fumble it right back and you don't get on the next one. Those are the little things that you have to have some luck in. You have to jump on that. Tennessee had 0 turnovers. They didn't get 1 turnover from Georgia in this game, and they had opportunities to get a couple turnovers. There was a weird thing where they kick it out of bounds, and they don't call that a flag right before the end of the half, where Tennessee gets the ball at 35, where that ball clearly goes to the left, and that I don't even know which official that is, but doesn't call kicking it out of bounds outside the
right?
5. Yeah, it's out. Like it just goes way left and all that. But
what's the situation there though?
It was right before the half. After the field goal by Georgia.
More than like 10 seconds left or something.
Yeah, I think there were like 5 seconds. But it was just one of those like, what are we doing? But I don't think it affected the game or changed the outcome of the game. But it was tough. It was like one of those where you're like, oh, this is the Alabama Saban experience a little bit, where the Georgia's in that mode where you're like, but. I've always said you can't put yourself in a position where you're relying on officials to bail you out on the road in a tough environment. It's like Tennessee did not lose this game because of penalties, but it was one of those games where, man, you're just like, can we get something here? And I know I'm missing a couple in terms of just some no calls. I don't know. Was there anything in the building that stood out to you, or maybe on the Georgia side that I'm forgetting?
I know one play that Tennessee fans have talked about, and Kirk Herbstreit was talking about it, but the ref on the broadcast corrected him because Beck on one of the third downs, I want to say,
the back false start where he moves.
but he's going backwards, and he's allowed to go backwards. That's what the ref said. You can't be like moving forward or side to side, but you can be like fading away, I guess. I don't know. So that I guess that wasn't a missed call, and that was just a ridiculous throw too. That was a pretty clutch play on the third down. Beck just put it on London Humphreys. That was on that final drive to seal the game. There was the one, I mean, right after Georgia went up 14-0 at the very end, like could have been a scoop and score. They blow it dead. I don't know who caught like a 5-yard. He's fighting for extra yard. It gets stripped. Like could have won this thing by 21 points. Like, I don't know. So really, but no, I don't know. I saw that Tennessee fans were upset about calls. I'm not sure what the specific ones were. And I know Georgia fans have this kind of like conspiracy that's been going back. I think the data, I want to say it's Brandon Adams that's always talking about it. Like the last like 3 years that teams, just Georgia opponents, get significantly fewer penalties versus Georgia than they do in like all their other games. Like that's like, it's like a 3-year thing. I don't know if you believe in that or not, but you know, I didn't really notice many egregious calls by any chance, like by any means.
And I just don't think that was what happened. Like we talked about at the top of the show, it was more of what we're talking about here, with Tennessee getting no pressure on Carson Beck and allowing him to get in a rhythm. Tennessee having 0 pass plays over 20 yards. Like there's Nico having no time in the pocket for the majority of the game. Your offensive line, like that's the ultimate thing. Is like this is a trench game. Like it's how you play in the line of scrimmage. And I thought coming in, this was the closest Tennessee has been to Georgia in terms of line of scrimmage talent, and especially on the defensive line. And they just didn't win. Like Tennessee did not win on the defensive line all night long. And that stunned me. I think also the other one I just remember was Jackson Moy coming out on that 12 man on the field call.
He was absolutely on the field.
No, well, so that's not, so people have been doing that. Teams have been doing that to Tennessee all season long. And Tennessee did, where look, again, it's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things at the game, but the ref usually stands with the ball and waits for Jackson Moy, because Georgia did sub that you have a certain amount of time and they get off the field and then they come off the ball and then they can snap it. So it was one of those where you're like, what are we doing? Like, well, why are we calling that? And Tennessee, like, it was a nothing burger, but it was a dumb call, and to allow them to snap it in the official coming off the ball. But
yeah, I mean, I think that turned like what would have been a 3rd and 9 or 3rd and 7 into like a 2nd and 2 or something like that near the.
Well, the other thing we haven't mentioned, I haven't seen a lot of Tennessee fans talk about this, but here's something I wonder what you thought about this in the moment. Heupel punted in Georgia territory twice in this game, and
yes,
it blew my mind both times. Where I'm jotting this down and I'm like, "What are you doing?" Because I mean, there was one where
the one where they took the delay of game. Sorry to interrupt you. That would have been like a 53-yarder or something, wouldn't it?
And I don't understand what those were. So there was a false start by Lance Hurd late that goes from 4th and 5 to 4th and 10. And they were at Georgia's 46. Again, still go for it, because after they punted, Georgia went 12 plays, 92 yards. Like, yeah, you pinned them at the 8, but then you didn't get the ball back, and like you just can't, like, your defense didn't come through in the second half. But you also punted earlier. Which drive was this? Where they were at, the Georgia 41. They took the delay game. That's the one you're talking about. Where, again, so this was the combination where they go to Miles Kitselman twice in a row. It was 2nd and 6 at Georgia's 36, and they throw 2 passes. And then they take a delay of game, and then you punt. You could have just ran the ball once with Dylan Sampson. He's averaging 5 yards a carry all night. He can get you into 49, 50-yard territory and kick the field goal.
Oh, but, so they were at the 30. They were at the 36 before the delay of game. Yeah, that is a 53-yarder.
Like, I don't understand those calls at all in the second half. Like, you're in plus territory on the road in this environment. Like, that blew my mind, not just once, but twice, to punt in those scenarios. That was a Kentucky, like, Mark Stoops, like, decision on both those, to just try and pin them up, which you did, and it backfired. Like, you got to play for points there. You got to have I understand the offense was having their struggles, but you're in plus territory. You don't know when you're getting the ball back.
Let's be fair. Like, this was an uncharacteristic performance by Georgia's offense. So, like, I will say, I don't remember what the down and distance was. When they were going left to right, I think it was like a 4th and 5 or something. At one point that they ended up, kind of trying to get Georgia to jump, and then they just ended up punting it away. I think especially with how Tennessee had been able to convert third down so many times, and Nico making plays with his legs, I felt worried about Tennessee keeping drives alive on fourth down. And so that's kind of Heupel's thing, is to push the envelope and go for it on fourth down. But I mean, making this Georgia offense drive 80 yards on you, that was a calculation that wasn't like a terrible calculation. You have to trust your defense. This is the best Tennessee defense the entire time Heupel's been at Tennessee. They've been so good all year. You probably didn't think Georgia was capable of going for 80, 90-yard drives as often as they did.
Yeah, I wonder if that's like when Heupel's going through film stuff today, if those are two decisions he wishes he had back. I don't know if that changes the game, but it was very uncharacteristic of Heupel's aggressive play calling. And I mean, he went for it on his own 10 less than a month ago. We're so far removed from that. I don't know, it just blows my mind. So what was that, the Florida game? He went for it at Tennessee's own 10-yard line.
Sounds right.
And now we're punting from the 30, or we're punting from the 36. Look, what are we doing? It just that was something that I feel like it has not been brought enough by Tennessee fans 24 hours out here. But that's like some of those second half conservative play calls were just, I didn't agree with them at the time, and I just kind of, I don't know. But at the grand scheme of things, I think Tennessee played Georgia well. Wouldn't you, based on where you thought Tennessee was coming in, this was always going to be a tough game to come in and win. The line was 10.5, whatever it was, it ended up being. Tennessee right there until the end, and but you're shut out again in the second half. That's not great. But I think by and large, Tennessee played pretty well. They don't turn the ball over. They kept it close. The defense had a rough day, giving up 31 points for the first time all season. But it still, Nico, I think, progressed. You talk about Nico's active, but they were in it. That game did not feel like it was getting out of hand, and Tennessee was still fighting deep into the fourth quarter. And that was the first time that has been the case in this series since Heupel has been here. So I think it was progress, and I think that is something I would make sure that Tennessee fans see, is that this was progress, and this was the hardest place to win in college football right now. And you were tied at the half. You were up 10-0 early. You pressed Georgia. You didn't get there. You still got more to do. But I think they played, by and large, a pretty good game, and you just needed some of these breaks to go your way. Some of those, the Bell fumble, I talked about. There's just certain things where if you're going to steal one on the road in this environment, you got to get those.
Fumble was even luckier. The one that he was able to recover himself.
Yeah.
But yeah, the green line stat I had for this game was Georgia had 11 pass plays of 15 plus yards in this one, and Tennessee had 1. And so that was one of the things we talked about the lead up to this game, was that Georgia's offense had, there's a lot of teams that haven't played complete games, but Georgia's one of those few teams that hadn't played complete games that actually had played really good games on both sides of the ball. And this was definitely the most complete game they played all season long. I'll definitely give Tennessee credit. This was the closest game of the Heupel era, and you can talk about closing the gap and all of that, but is it closing the gap, or was this kind of Tennessee's shot that this is their best team or the best defense they've had under Heupel, and this is probably the worst Georgia team of the last 4 years, and it's still, Georgia still won it by multiple scores?
I just think it's a year-to-year league now, and I think Tennessee this is another good recruiting class they're coming in here with. They get Georgia at home next year. We'll see what Georgia looks like. We assume Georgia will be reloaded and better next year. I mean, they're bringing in a good receiving recruiting class. They've done really well there, but they're going to have to go in the portal heavy. They're replacing a lot of guys in the receiver room. That we'll see what the running back room looks like at Georgia going to next year. But look, I mean, I don't think anything's given, year to year anymore. So I just think we'll see what the quarterback situation looks like at Georgia next year. What if it's Gunnar Stockton and it doesn't go well, or Jaden Rashada, and there's a huge step down there? So we assume this is the best chance for Tennessee to get Georgia, but maybe not. Maybe next year is actually the better year. And I mean, Tennessee, obviously a lot of success at home over the last 3 years under Heupel, and just really as a whole under Heupel at Neyland. So you would feel better about that, because I mean, you have swept Florida and Alabama at home the last 2 times they've been here. So I don't know. I mean, we say that conventional wisdom says, yeah, that makes sense that this was the time to do it, but I also just don't know. Like, what if Nico breaks out next year? What if he got all these reps in now and he looks more like the guy that you thought he was going to be this year, next year? And then you're like, oh, we feel completely different because Nico's clearly the better quarterback and has all this experience. And tennis and Georgia guessed wrong in the portal, and Jaden Rashad is not the guy. And they have some quarterback. You know what I mean? Like, I just think there's so many unknowns going into next year that I'm just not at a point in the modern college football climate to be like, oh, they missed their best shot. I will say this, though. They missed a very good shot to end this streak at 7 this year.
Well, and I think that those things, that's definitely possible. Nico could definitely be a breakout candidate. He's going to be everyone's probably breakout candidate going into next year because he has shown signs. But this is the worst offense in the 4 years of Josh Heupel, right? And I would say last year was the second worst offense. And those are the 2 best defenses he's also had. So it's got to be frustrating because Josh Heupel is supposed to be this offensive guy, and the offense isn't necessarily, moving in the right direction. So I like in the 4 games versus Georgia, they have 14 second half points combined in all 4 games. And they haven't scored a meaningful second half touchdown in any of those games. They've just kind of been some late kind of make the score look a little closer touchdowns at the end. So I don't know. I don't think you're worried about Josh Heupel by any means. He went 10-2. Like, this team's been really good, but I feel like I don't know that Nico and this offense is necessarily going to be better a year from now. Like, without Dylan Sampson, like, is this running game going to be as dominant? Is this defense going to be close to as good next year? Like, I mean, I think that's a legitimate concern that this was the best kind of everything coming together with some of these NFL prospects you have on defense this year. Like James Pierce, like guys like that don't grow on trees. So.
Well, Jordan Ross is a 5-star. He's a true freshman. Like, you have Caleb Herring, who's a sophomore, and Joshua Josephs, who's behind him. They'll all 3 be back, I think.
Yeah.
They're going to lose a lot in the interior on the defensive line, but I think on strong side and at Leo, they're going to be okay. And I'm just not going to bet against Rodney Garner developing and being okay there going into next year. And David Hobbs flashed in this game at defensive tackle. He was a 4-star guy from North Carolina 2 cycles ago. So I think he's going to be good. Jackson Moy, who you saw early, he's been a great transfer from Stanford. He's a dude in the interior. But I think linebacker, they're going to be better next year. So they're going to have only blue chippers really in that rotation. Aaron Carter continues to be a star. Boo Carter was great. Like, also, Boo Carter returning punts. Like, he had a great 29-yard punt return where I thought he was going to break it. It was a great tackle, by the way, by the Georgia punter. He may have saved
first
6
punt
there.
Return all season.
Yeah,
that Georgia's allowed the first return, just period.
Really?
And what's I'm ranking on the
Thorson, right?
Scott Thorman. That was the first baseman for the Braves years ago. What is it? Thorson? Brett
Wait,
Thorson?
Who are you talking about? First baseman for the Braves?
Yeah, Scott Thorman. That was the first baseman years ago, right? I was saying that was the name I had in my head. I think Brett Thorson, is that the punter's name?
Scott Thorman. That's a name I've not heard in a long time.
Yeah, that's a random one right there. Braves first base, like 2007, 2006. I don't know.
Goodness gracious. I have not heard this name in forever. I'm looking him up. Yeah, this is a
But the last thing I'll say was I think, like you were saying, like Georgia didn't run the ball well. Like, this is as good as Georgia could have expected to run the ball, given just the ridiculous injuries they had. Like, this was such a gritty offensive performance. Like, in terms of Nate Frazier was supposed to be the number 4 running back coming into this season, and Chauncey Bowens was not supposed to get any carries. Like, these are true freshmen that Georgia had to play at running back. Like, London Humphreys had some big catches. Ben Urasic had some big catches. This is Oscar Delp's best game, maybe of his career. Nitro Tuggle, a freshman, was getting on the field. Like,
that was the other one, by the way.
You saw Georgia get a lot of guys some playing time that haven't played. Like, Georgia's, and especially Georgia most years is got like 5, 6, 7 guys that have like 25, 30 catches on a season, and they don't ever have those big numbers. Like, this year, it's been like the same 3 or 4 receivers like every game because they don't have the depth there this year. So that was another encouraging thing to see some of these young guys, actually making some plays. And even they did still have some drops, but they had a lot of big time plays in the passing game.
That was the other one we forgot, was the helmet ripped off situation where whether or not it was a face mask.
Oh yeah, that's got to be a face mask. You ripped the helmet off.
Well, no, that's not a face mask. If the helmet just comes off, like naturally in a football move, like they're pulling him down. Like that was the thing. Is like
it looked
that's
like
not
the guy's hand was down there, and then the face mask or helmet pops off.
It was it was not clear on the replay.
See, that was a ball don't lie penalty, because that was right after the Arian Smith 45-yard catch or whatever, where you got the offensive pass interference for doing the same thing that every receiver ever does.
What do you want him to do? Like, what are we calling? That was like the most egregious, where you just like
the most egregious. He had his hands on him. Like,
I mean, but you're gonna get flagged for that every time. Like, but there's no hiding that one.
That was one thing I wish I could have been on your guys' panel on Friday night. Someone asked you guys a question if you could change any rule in college football. Once I was racking my brain, I had like 2 or 3 that I wanted to change. But offensive pass interference, it should be an incomplete pass. It should not be that should be the penalty, that it's an incomplete pass, loss of down. Not that you lose 15 yards. Like, it makes no sense to me, especially when a 50-yard defensive pass interference will just be a 15-yard penalty like that. Those two things just aren't the same to me. So the fact that I hate offensive pass interference, and then they had the face mask, that canceled it out. So, no harm, no foul. That's how I see it.
That's fair.
Last thing is, were you saying anything else about this game?
I mean, I just think ultimately, look, Tennessee fans, like, it's going to be okay. Like, I'm telling you, like, you're still in good shape. Like, people are still putting you in the playoffs. Like, Andy Staple putting you in his bracketology after this loss. Like, it's not a bad loss. Like, it's tough. But take care of Vanderbilt. Take care of UTEP. I just think they're going to be in a good position. I don't think Tennessee's season is coming close. I think Nico is playing the best ball down the stretch here. He showed a lot. Dylan Sampson, still a dude. You're still running the football. The defense, I think defensive line will bounce back. They'll take it personally. The corners have been really good. You talk about, like, if this was Tennessee's best shot with their defense, like Gerard McCoy and Ricky Gibson are back next year. The safeties are better. Boo Carter will be a sophomore. He's only getting better. Linebackers will be better. I think the defensive line might take a little bit of step back. I think defense is going to be very good again next year. The offensive line, you get 5-star true freshman David Sanders, number 1 offensive lineman out of the state of North Carolina and in the country. He's coming in, probably a plug-and-play guy at either left or right tackle. A lot of receivers coming in. That's the key to me, is like you have Travis Smith Jr. coming in from Westlake, who's had a huge senior year out of the state of Georgia. Mike Matthews, is he featured more, 5-star from a year ago. Braylon Staley. Like, they have a lot of blue chippers like in the pipeline, but they got to start playing. So I think next year is a gigantic year for Kelsey Pope in the receiver room, because this is back-to-back years of the passing game really, really struggling. And I think what you've seen this year is a little bit of Joe Milton vindication, where it's just Nico is also going through some growing pains, but clearly there is the drop-off from what the receivers were able to do in 2022 to the last 2 years was bigger than anticipated. And I think next year is quietly a big year for the receivers, because I think my gut is, and what I'm seeing is, Nico has been good, and Dylan Sampson, the running game, has been good, and the receivers, it's just, that's been the problem.
I would say the running game has been great. Nico has been fine.
I think Nico's been good his last 12 quarters. I think Nico qualifies as good his last 12 quarters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I want to say I've always loved the 12-team playoff, and that Georgia and Tennessee's playoff chances are still alive. Never questioned moving.
Do you gotta like this though, that you're the situation that you're in, because you won this game and you're still not going to go to the SEC title game, so you get to avoid having to play another hard fought game in the SEC title game. Because right now
here's a scenario.
It's going to take a lot of help.
It's just the Auburn Tigers.
Yeah,
that's if Auburn wins a game, then Georgia, I think, goes to the SEC championship.
I thought Auburn would have to beat Alabama,
but Auburn can also beat Texas A&M. And if A&M loses to Auburn and beats Texas,
okay, that's what I'm saying. You need some help. That's some chicanery.
Well, I mean, A&M beating Texas at College Station is not a long shot at all.
But Texas goes in that. I mean, Texas A&M goes in that scenario. It's Texas A&M versus Alabama. Yeah,
no, but I'm saying if A&M loses before the Texas game, that's the scenario where Georgia and then beats.
Well, they only have
Texas
one other game before it, right?
But then, those are the last 2 games. So if Auburn upsets Texas A&M, then obviously you need the second step to happen for Georgia to get in. But then if Auburn beats Alabama the following week, then I think Georgia would just go in favor of Alabama instead. You know what I mean? So like you said, I think most Georgia fans, myself included, don't even really want Georgia to be in the SEC championship. With what these, the injuries that are going on with this team, and the health at the running back and receiver positions. Dylan Bell got hurt in this one, and I don't know the severity of that injury as of yet. So like I think Georgia would prefer their next meaningful game be about a month from now. No disrespect. I mean, it's definitely disrespect to Georgia Tech, but Georgia should be able to beat Georgia Tech with their twos. So famous last words. Obviously they did beat Miami.
They played Georgia well though the last 2 years.
No, they have, but it's Georgia Tech. Like I mean, Georgia has dominated that rivalry, and they.
But this goes back to my point though about Tennessee fans just like doom and gloom about everything. It's like, look, man, it just takes one. It takes Georgia getting tripped up one more time, Bama getting tripped up one more time, Texas getting tripped up one more time, or Ole Miss, and I think you're just going to be in, and you might be in even with all that not happening. Yeah. So I just look.
I think Tennessee's in a really weird space though. They're like it's a really uncertain area because I was going through it today. I mean, we can like try to just go through what we think the rankings will be, but like Georgia's not going to get that much higher in the rankings. Like they're going to go ahead of Tennessee and probably BYU now after they lost. BYU, just a side note, BYU losing was the best thing that happened to Tennessee this weekend because the Big 12 became a one-bid league this weekend. So that's one spot that's not going to get taken. But I know the AP poll has Georgia ahead of Ole Miss. But,
the AP poll is insane, which we'll get into.
The playoff ranking isn't going to have that. So Georgia's going to go ahead of Tennessee, but I think there's going to be – I don't know if you remember last year how Texas was just that roadblock ahead of Alabama.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas podcast. Hell yeah.